sometimes the story about AIDS isn't just about having HIV.
One of the unique challenges with HIV, it's a challenge and an opportunity, but it is unique, is it's not just a story about a disease. It's a story about culture, it's a story about politics, it's a story about science. It's a very complex story. When you start to report on it, you all of a sudden start peeling things away, and you realize how complex it is, and I think it therefore makes it really uniquely hard to, what is the focus? What are you trying to say? And can you do a story justice without touching on all those other areas? The opportunity is that it's a very rich story. It really tells us a lot about our culture and our society and how we treat disease and how we respond to it.
The cross-cultural issues are the ones that really interest me, and it's challenging. You think you know about AIDS after doing X number of stories, even one, and then you go to another place. You don't have to leave the country. You can go from the Bronx to San Francisco to Cleveland. Every group has its own cultural norms around this because AIDS and HIV have to do with such deeply personal issues, I think. It goes right to the heart of who someone is or who a family is. And so who a town, a city, and then getting bigger. But it's always amazing to me and thrilling in a way to just have my eyes completely opened again every time I start to talk to people.
Common misperceptions are that certain groups of people are taking more risks. People see somebody of a certain country, a certain race, a certain community, and just say, well, that person must be more at risk. We don't know that. And they sort of attach their own understanding of who they think somebody is to their risk level, or the opposite. Oh, that person would never be at risk for HIV. That's both dangerous to the person as well as to the community, because we should all understand our own risk. And when we maintain ideas that certain types of people aren't at risk, others are at risk, that may not be accurate. So there's still misconceptions about who is at risk and what does that really mean.
Here's what I think has been the biggest challenge for me, having done HIV and AIDS reporting for as long as I've done it. It is the fact that you've got to find new and different ways to tell the story. A story that, although it changes ever so slowly, incrementally. There are every now and then dramatic events, the failed vaccine, the cut or the drop in numbers because of new ways of counting. But ultimately, there are those 33 million people whom you don't want to neglect, don't want to forget, don't overlook. But what can you say new about them? What can you say that people won't feel they've already heard before?
How do you persuade the gatekeeper, the editor, that this is still important?
Yeah, yeah. Local, go local. How I have been successful is to convince or to present evidence to the editor that this is a problem in their world, whatever their world is. If they're a sports fanatic, I find out what's going on in sports and HIV education.
I'm very good at selling, I find. So I mean, and I find that I have to do it all the time. I will use guilt. They don't like it when you do that, and sometimes you can't use it too often. I think I try to make the best case. I think you have to really go prepared when you speak to the editor about why it should be done.
There are a couple things you can do. One of them is getting documentation for your stories. So if you go to your editor with some paper or some figures, and you have something that no one else has, you have a breaking story. So you already have got their attention. And you try to go for significant breaking stories. You go for it. You're very aggressive in it. The second thing I think is very important and often overlooked is to figure out how the editor can actually learn him or herself about what's going on in the epidemic. And that can be ranging from things like programs that actually do training on HIV and AIDS to include editors in that training to sensitize them more of how to cover it. But it also can be, inviting that editor out to the field or to an interview that you do and getting them more personally invested in understanding the story. So I think you just need to come up with a couple of different approaches. I know editors have almost no time. I know it's really hard to get them out of the newsroom. It can mean bringing in someone who's inspiring to you. It can, either a government official or a funder or someone who's positive. Bringing them into the newsroom and setting up a meeting, talking to them, or even giving them material to read at night. Think of ways of making it interesting for them and not just the traditional back and forth you have with an editor of saying, oh, I have this feature story or I have this. Do something different, change the dynamic a little bit.
Find out the statistics in the readership if it was a newspaper, or viewership if it's a local television station, the demographics of your national station, who's our viewership, what can we say of value to them? And that's really all the editor wants to know.
A lot of people, a lot of editors in particular, are tired of feature stories about HIV, and often feature stories are about this poor community or this poor person. Oh, they're suffering. They need more resources. They need more support. The granny who has and doing an amazing job with 24 orphans in her community, helping them out. And there are amazing stories like that. And people should always remember how resilient communities and families have been in trying to deal with the epidemic. But there's also, I think, a obligation for reporters to push more, to actually go and gather hard facts about what their government and what other governments are doing and whether it actually is moving in the right direction.
We are very limited in the ability of any country to truly measure new infections. Really trying to understand how many people are becoming newly infected is a very challenging scientific task. There's no test that can tell us that exactly. And there's because of the long incubation period, people not knowing they're infected, we won't ever really be able to get there. And that frustrates reporters. But it's not, it's not because the data are being withheld. It's a real unique challenge to this disease that people need to understand.
One thing I have to deal with a lot and correct people about is, so I write often and deeply about HIV in South Carolina. And many people will come up and say, oh, thank you for your advocacy, and they appreciate my advocacy. And so I often have to remind them that though what I do helps with their trying to raise awareness or raise money to help people in need, that what I'm doing is journalism, not advocacy. And I think sometimes it can be difficult for a reporter to walk that line between advocacy and journalism, and you have to be very, very careful that you don't cross that line.
And how do you make sure that you don't cross the line in your reporting and your stories?
Well, I try to be balanced, of course, and then if there's anything going, I'm not always flowery about the HIV advocates and the lawmakers who might be supporting a particular cause. I will try to talk with people who might be in opposition to what they're trying to do, and so still get the people who are against and people who are for, so I present a balanced view. And I don't ignore things because out of sympathy to a cause or to a certain group of people.